My family used my college fund to pay for my cousin's wedding. You can always take out loans, they shrugged. Years later, they needed my help, and I gave them the same answer. I, 22M, discovered the betrayal on what should have been the happiest day of my life, my college acceptance day. The envelope from State University felt heavy in my hands as I tore it open, my heart pounding with anticipation. For years of maintaining a 3.8 GPA, countless hours of volunteer work, and sleepless nights studying for the SATs had led to this moment. The acceptance letter was everything I had dreamed of, but the financial aid package made my stomach drop. Even with scholarships, I would need the college fund my grandparents had set up for me when I was born. I rushed home, clutching the acceptance letter, ready to share the news with my parents. The house was unusually quiet when I walked in, and I found my parents sitting at the kitchen table with serious expressions. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, and my father was staring at his hands. I announced my acceptance with excitement, expecting celebration, but instead received uncomfortable silence. When I mentioned needing to access the college fund, my parents exchanged a look that made my blood run cold. My father cleared his throat and explained that there had been a family emergency. My cousin Sarah was getting married in 2 months, and her parents couldn't afford the wedding they had promised her. The family had decided to use my college fund to help pay for the ceremony and reception. The words hit me like a physical blow. I asked how much they had taken, hoping it was just a loan, something we could work around. My mother whispered that they had used all of it, $37,000 that my grandparents had carefully saved over 18 years. I demanded to know how they could make this decision without consulting me. My father's response became burned into my memory forever. He told me I could always take out student loans, that education was an investment I could pay back over time. But Sarah only gets one wedding day. The argument that followed was explosive. I pointed out that Sarah had known about her wedding for over a year and could have planned accordingly. I reminded them that this money was specifically designated for my education, a gift from grandparents who had worked double shifts at the factory to save every penny. My mother tried to justify their decision by explaining that family comes first, that Sarah was like a daughter to them since her parents struggled financially. She insisted that I was being selfish for not understanding the importance of family unity. I asked if they had considered that I might not qualify for enough loans to cover the full cost of college. My father dismissed my concerns, saying that smart kids like me always find a way to make things work. That night, I called my grandparents, hoping they could intervene. My grandmother's voice broke when I told her what happened. She explained that legally, since the fund was in my parents' names as trustees, they had the right to use it however they saw fit. She and my grandfather had trusted my parents to use the money for my education, never imagining they would redirect it elsewhere. Sarah's wedding was everything she had dreamed of: an elegant venue, designer dress, open bar, and a reception for 200 guests. I watched my college fund transform into centerpieces, a live band, and premium catering. Every detail of the celebration represented a piece of my future that had been stripped away. During the reception, relatives kept telling me how beautiful the wedding was and how generous my family had been to make it possible. Sarah herself thanked me for my sacrifice, saying she knew I understood that family always comes first. Her words felt like salt in an open wound. I spent the following months desperately applying for additional scholarships and grants, but the deadlines had passed for most programs. The financial aid office at State University was sympathetic, but explained that their budget for the year was already allocated. I could attend with the partial aid I had received, but I would need to take out significant loans to cover the remaining costs. My parents encouraged me to accept the debt, reminding me that most students graduate with loans anyway. They seemed genuinely confused by my continued anger, treating the situation as if it were a minor inconvenience rather than a fundamental betrayal of trust. I made the painful decision to defer my admission for a year, hoping to save money and reapply for better financial aid. I took a job at a local warehouse, working 40-hour weeks while watching my high school classmates head off to college. The year of manual labor was humbling and motivating in equal measure. I saved every penny possible while watching my parents continue their comfortable lifestyle, seemingly unaffected by the chaos they had created in my life. They occasionally asked about my college plans, but always with the assumption that I would simply figure things out on my own. When I finally started college the following year, I was carrying nearly $40,000 in student loan debt. I worked part-time throughout my studies, often choosing between buying textbooks and eating regular meals. While my classmates enjoyed typical college experiences, I was calculating the cost of every decision against my mounting debt. My parents attended my graduation ceremony, proudly taking photos and acting as if they had been supportive throughout my journey. When relatives congratulated them on raising such a successful son, they accepted the praise without acknowledging the obstacles they had created. After graduation, I moved across the country for a job opportunity, partly for career advancement, but mostly to create distance from my family. I wanted to build my life without the constant reminder of their betrayal and their expectation that I should simply forgive and forget. I threw myself into my career with the intensity of someone who had learned that security could only come from personal achievement. I worked 60-hour weeks, took on additional projects, and pursued every opportunity for advancement. The memory of watching my college fund pay for wedding flowers motivated me through every difficult day. 5 years after graduation, I received a phone call that changed everything. My father's voice was strained as he explained that he had been diagnosed with a serious heart condition requiring immediate surgery. The medical bills were overwhelming, and their insurance coverage was inadequate. He asked if I could help with the costs, explaining that they had exhausted their savings and were facing the possibility of losing their house. The surgery alone would cost $60,000, and the ongoing treatment would require additional funds. I listened to his explanation with growing amazement at the irony of the situation. The man who had told me that I could always take out loans was now asking me for financial assistance that he couldn't obtain through traditional lending. When he finished explaining their dire situation, I delivered the response that I had been unconsciously preparing for years. I told him that he could always take out loans, that medical debt was something he could pay back over time, but I only had one chance to build my financial security. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. My father asked if I was seriously going to abandon my family in their time of need. I reminded him that he had made the same choice when he abandoned my educational needs for a wedding celebration. My mother got on the phone, crying as she begged me to reconsider. She insisted that this situation was different, that it was a matter of life and death. I acknowledged that it was indeed different. Their crisis was the result of circumstances beyond their control, while my crisis had been the result of their deliberate choice. Word of my refusal spread quickly through the extended family. Sarah called me directly, expressing shock that I would hold a grudge over something that happened so long ago. She reminded me that her wedding had been a beautiful celebration that brought the whole family together. I asked Sarah if she would be willing to return the money now that my parents needed it for medical expenses. She explained that she and her husband had used the money years ago and couldn't possibly repay it now. She suggested that I was being vindictive and that my parents' current crisis should take priority over old grievances. Other relatives reached out with similar messages, painting me as the selfish family member who had abandoned his parents in their darkest hour. They conveniently forgot the details of how my college fund had been redirected, focusing instead on the current emergency. My grandmother called with a different perspective. She told me that while she understood my anger, she was worried about my father's health and hoped I would find it in my heart to help. She also mentioned that she and my grandfather had always regretted not fighting harder to protect my college fund. I explained to my grandmother that this wasn't about revenge or holding grudges. It was about the principle that actions have consequences and that my parents needed to understand the impact of their previous decision. I had learned to solve my financial problems independently, and now they needed to do the same. My parents ultimately found a way to manage the medical crisis through a combination of payment plans, assistance programs, and help from other family members. My father's surgery was successful, and his recovery progressed well despite the financial stress. However, our relationship never recovered from the dual betrayals, their original decision to use my college fund and my refusal to help during their crisis. Family gatherings became awkward affairs where we maintained polite conversation while avoiding any discussion of deeper issues. Sarah's marriage ended in divorce 3 years later, making the expensive wedding seem even more wasteful in retrospect. She never acknowledged the irony that my college education, which they had deemed less important than her wedding day, had provided me with the financial stability they now envied. Update 1. 2 years after my father's recovery, I received an unexpected call from my aunt, Sarah's mother. She was calling to apologize for something that had been weighing on her conscience since the wedding. She revealed that Sarah's wedding hadn't been the financial emergency my parents had described. Sarah and her fiancé had originally planned a modest ceremony within their budget, but when they learned about my college fund, they had convinced my parents to upgrade to a much more expensive celebration. My aunt explained that Sarah had specifically requested the live band, premium catering, and designer dress after learning that additional money was available. The wedding had grown from a $15,000 celebration to a $37,000 extravaganza specifically because they knew my college fund could cover the difference. This revelation reframed everything I thought I knew about the situation. My parents hadn't just made a poor decision in a moment of family crisis. They had been manipulated into funding Sarah's upgraded wedding at my expense. I confronted my parents with this new information, and their response was even more disappointing than their original betrayal. They admitted they had known about Sarah's role in escalating the wedding costs, but had hoped I would never find out. They had allowed me to believe that the expensive wedding was a necessary family emergency rather than an optional luxury. Update 2. Armed with the truth about Sarah's manipulation, I decided to take a more active approach to addressing the situation. I calculated the total cost of my student loans, including interest, and determined that my parents' decision had ultimately cost me over $55,000. I sent a detailed letter to every family member who had criticized my refusal to help with the medical bills. The letter outlined the true circumstances of how my college fund had been used and included documentation of my student loan payments over the years. The family's response was mixed, but largely supportive once they understood the full scope of what had happened. Several relatives apologized for their previous criticism and expressed shock at Sarah's role in manipulating the situation. Sarah herself never responded to the letter, but I heard through family channels that she was angry about being publicly embarrassed by my decision to share the truth. She maintained that her wedding had been a family celebration that everyone should have been happy to support. My parents' reaction was defensive and angry. They accused me of trying to destroy family relationships and insisted that I was making too big a deal out of something that happened years ago. They seemed more upset about being exposed than about the original betrayal. Update 3. The truth about Sarah's manipulation actually brought me a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. For years, I had struggled with guilt about refusing to help my parents, wondering if I was being too harsh or vindictive. Learning that their decision had been based on manipulation rather than genuine emergency helped me understand that my response had been appropriate. My relationship with my parents remained strained, but has evolved into something more honest. They finally acknowledged that their decision had been wrong and that they had underestimated the impact on my life. While they never offered to repay the money, they did express genuine regret for the first time. I've built a successful career and achieved financial stability despite the obstacles they created. The experience taught me valuable lessons about self-reliance and the importance of protecting my own interests, even when family pressure suggests otherwise. The irony of the situation still strikes me regularly. My parents taught me that family obligations should override personal financial planning, but when they needed help, I had learned their lesson too well. They had shown me that sometimes you have to make difficult choices about money, and I simply applied their own logic to their situation. Looking back, I don't regret my decision to refuse their request for help. The experience forced them to confront the consequences of their choices and demonstrated that actions have lasting impacts beyond the immediate moment. Sometimes the most important lessons come from experiencing the same treatment you've given others. The college fund they redirected for a wedding that lasted one day could have prevented decades of student loan payments. When they needed help, I gave them the same consideration they had given my future. I told them they could always find another way.